Welcome to my early, mid, and late game strategies video. In this video, I want to talk about how builds evolve because I'm talking specifically about the stages of a specific build. So you may have been playing the game for a long time, you have one build, and now you want to start a different one. So that new build will have an early, mid, and late stage. That's what I mean by that. And please keep in mind that, like all my videos, I'm just expressing my opinions. Different players have different points of view on how to play the game, which is perfectly normal. But this is what I think are the important things to focus on in each of the stages of this game regarding your builds. So, for the early game, you start a new build, probably for your first character. What are the three things that I recommend you to focus on? Now, let me bring this into the frame. Perfect. So for the early game, the three things that I think are more important, and this is something that I've already talked in other videos, this is not something new, are starting mana, your generator spells, and your damage. If you want to increase the damage that you deal, let's say, for example, that you have your first character gets to level 50. When I got my first character to level 50, no, I was able to do dungeons on hard difficulty. Maybe on difficulty 1, because at level 50 the difference is only going from level 54 to level 55. Maybe if you're lucky and have good equipment, you may be able to do difficulty 2, but this is what I'm talking about, okay? These are the early stages of the game. Now, every time you want to increase the difficulty, in my opinion, you need to make sure that you can dish out enough damage. Now, going back here, increasing your starting mana will allow you to use your spells on round 2, so you can start dishing out damage on round 2. Yes, you can deal damage if you have a decent physical build on round 1, but the higher your spell, your starting mana, uh, the earlier you will be able to start using your build when it's more than a single enemy. For a single enemy, I already made a video talking about the round 1 critical build, or pseudo build. Please watch it. But if you're facing a dungeon or you're doing an event, anything that has 2 or more enemies, you need sustainability, and for that you need starting mana and generator spells. And you need to increase your damage. So, as I was saying, when you want to increase the difficulty, make sure that you can kill your enemies in ideally in one hit, but let's be more realistic, 2 hits. Okay? If you cannot kill your opponents in 2 hits, don't increase the difficulty too much, because then fights drag for very, very long. They become really, really boring, and it's really not worth it. So, how do you increase your damage? Well, check all your armor pieces of equipment. When I say armor, I mean your head, shoulders, torso, hands, legs, and feet slots for the secondary attribute power. Now, power is the primary attribute of all weapons, shields, and accessories. So here you're going to have power in all of them. As you can see, primary attribute, power, primary attribute, power. But for your armors, you need it as a secondary attribute. So here, for example, the Crown of the Fallen, all armors have vitality as primary attribute, and you need to get items with power as secondary attribute. That's for all builds. Then, if you're using an elemental build, like this one that deals ice damage, what you want is pieces of equipment that increase your elemental damage. In this case, ice damage, I have plus 127%. So again, each piece of equipment that you can get with ice damage, put it on. Okay, this one, ice damage and power. Ice damage and power. Ice damage and power. You get the point. Now, for physical builds, like for example, for my mercenary, this is a physical build that has Dirty Blade to generate skulls, as well as some other equipment to generate skulls. How do you increase the damage? Well, power, just the same as elemental builds, but then you're gonna need critical hit chance and critical hit damage. These are the two stats that you really need. Either with attributes, in the case of the critical hit chance, if you can get tracked gloves together with runic boots, this is how you can easily increase your critical hit chance in 2 or 3 rounds. The critical hit damage will depend on attributes from your equipment. For example, this one has plus 96% to critical hit damage. Sometimes you will get random mythic pieces of equipment, and what you want to do with those is go to the tavern, to the corresponding crafter, Toragon for armors, GMK for accessories, and Soul Chaser for weapons and shields. And for example, for this one, you have Reforge. I don't recommend to reforge legendaries or epics, because this is an epic, for example. The cost is going to be, I don't really care about gold or shards because they're very easy to obtain. However, ore and gems are much more valuable. And as you can see, you're going to reroll one attribute for 75 ore and 50 gems. If we select a legendary, the cost is also 50 gems and 75 ore, but you are rerolling two different attributes. So you have twice the chances to get an attribute that you're looking for. And if you reroll a mythical piece of equipment, the cost is exactly the same, 75 ore and 50 gems, but you are rerolling three different attributes, so you have triple the chance compared to an epic, or 50% more chance compared to a legendary to get one attribute that you want. Obviously, I don't want to reroll this one because it already has power, which is one of the attributes I'm looking for. But for you, some of the pieces of equipment, you may want to reroll them. And again, if you are using an elemental build, look for power and elemental damage. And if you're using a physical build, look for power, critical hit chance, and critical hit damage. As long as you get one of them, put the item on and use what you can get. I would consider that the early game uh, most important things that you need to focus on, the strategies, as I named the video. Later on, you will reach a point where the build will reach the mid game. Now, it's hard to say when it is the mid game and when it isn't. So for the sake of the video, I'm going to establish two different things. First, that you get your crafters to level 50, because when you get your crafters to level 50, you open the refine options that will give you chances to change the element, change attributes, increase the quality, and increase the rarity. I don't recommend to increase rarity unless it's a unique legendary item, but I've already talked about that in other videos. And I will also say that your mid game is more or less when you can get your difficulty to level 10. Again, give or take. I'm giving, you know, broad strikes here about what I consider it can be good. So, at the mid game, as I said, get your crafters to level 50 if possible. That's what opens a lot of opportunities. This is when you should start working on your defense. Still, you need to deal enough damage, but the level 10 dungeons, I mean difficulty 10 dungeons, which is level 100 enemies, start hitting really hard. So this is the point where you need to work on some level of defense. And this is where you start swapping attributes with your crafters to get the good pieces of equipment that you will later on refine. So going back to the game, as I said, difficulty 10, this is where you want to get a Gasduli helm so you can survive enemies that hit harder because you start with a barrier. This is where if you can get some items with elite damage protection is only useful against the Kingdom Dragon and the boss rush in events. However, melee resistance is extremely useful for PvE content, and missile resistance is also important, but the reality is the vast majority of enemies in PvE use melee attacks. So this is the point where you want to, if you can afford it, get some melee resistance, get a Kazuli helm, maybe use the guard 4 set guard bonus that will increase your armor at mythic rarity by 30%. Things like that that will allow you to survive those harder hits. And this is, as I said, when you start thinking, okay, these are the essential pieces of equipment in my build, so I want to start giving them good uh, attributes. This is where you can swap attributes in between pieces of equipment. And this is what I would consider the mid-game strategy. And last but not least, the late game. I put here equipment tweaks, spell tweaks, and refining and polishing the last parts of your build. Now, what do I consider the late game? Well, let me give you an example with my main class, which is the Blue Shaman, as you already know. She has, in battle, no, excuse me, this is not the one I was looking for. Yeah, primary stats. She has almost 59,000 armor. This is the point, around 50,000, give or take, where you can tank the first hit for most enemies at level 100 and even level 120 enemies in events. But in fact, I've already finished the events for today with her, and as you can see, level 200, I can farm level 200 dungeons with her. Now, this works 98% of the time. Why do I say 98% of the time? Well, let me go to a dungeon. This is difficulty 10, level 100. Most, not all of them, but most enemies that are level 100 and higher, when you check their stats, you will see that they have 10% critical hit chance and plus 50% critical hit damage. Now, your block chance caps at 80%, which means that unless you have a way to blind your opponent on round 1, which sometimes happens with this build, it didn't happen right now, but with this build with my armor, I have a 20% chance to blind the enemy, which means that the first hit will be halved, but it's only 20% of the time, okay? It means that if the enemy gets a critical hit, not this one, this is only level 98, he cannot kill me, but if a higher level enemy gets a critical hit chance, which is 10% of the time, and I fail to block, which is an 80% chance, I will die. So this obviously means that 10% of the time he will get a critical hit chance, and 80% of that 10% I will be able to block, meaning 2% of the time he's gonna hit me for an additional 50% damage, and he will kill me if it's a high enough enemy level. Again, not this one, this is only 98, but in events that you can get up to level 200, 98% of the time I survive the first hit, 2% of the time I die. It's part of it. There is nothing I can do to avoid it. But what I mean by that late game is the same way as I said in the mid game, you need to focus on your defenses and use a Kazuli helm and things like that. When you get to this late game is when you can remove your Kazuli helm. I'm not saying you have to. Some builds can use it until the end, and it's a great piece of equipment and will save you that 2% of the time that otherwise you will die. But with certain builds that you may prioritize other things, like for example with this one, I'm not using the Kazuli helm because I'm using the Crown of the Fallen because of the configuration of the other pieces of equipment that I have. So I would call late game when you can remove the helmet and you can survive 98% of the time. Yeah, dying 2% of the time sucks, but it is what it is. Okay, the rest of the time you are tough enough to take on the most of the content of the game. And when I say equipment tweaks, well, for example, with this build that I have right now, this is the equipment I'm using, and I want to eventually replace the Savior's Locket with an Yggdrasil pendant. Why? Well, because this will trigger the Dragon King set bonuses together with my weapon, and the 2 set bonus gives, at mythic rarity, a 75% chance to cleanse any negative status effect on each turn, which is really, really good, really powerful. However, as you can see, I only have a legendary Yggdrasil pendant. I don't have a mythical one yet. So in the meantime, I'm going to keep using the Savior's Locket because it has much better stats. But eventually, when I said equipment tweaks, this is what I mean. Also, I'm still using these Dragon Guard pants that, as you can see, are pretty low. They're not very good, together with the Dragon Guard ring, which is a little bit better, but not by much. As you can see, again, the stats are pretty low, because originally I was planning to use 4 pieces of equipment for the Dragon Guard set, so I could take advantage of the additional 15% elemental damage. But later on, I decided to make some other changes in the build, so that's no longer a possibility. So I will very likely replace these items later on. I will probably go for an Ouroboros uh, ring, not swamp soaked, but the regular one, to get regeneration, which is great for dungeon events like the one that I was just running, that you get burned and you lose health every turn unless you can regenerate somehow. And for the pants, I will probably use the Buccaneers breeches. I need to remove the filter, which are here. I will probably use these ones, but obviously after I get better secondary attributes. So this is what I mean by tweaking your equipment. When it comes to tweaking spells, for example, for the assassin, this is another build that I already made a video about, which is the Nightblade build. This is the configuration I recommend you start with 3 generators, which will help you a lot to stun your opponents by getting stun rolls. But later on, when you have a much more powerful build and better equipment, you can start making changes, like for example using Climb the Peak. That will dramatically increase your power every turn that you use it, or use a secondary damaging spell, like for example Den of Nightmares, to replace darkness. So you can have, with this way, one spell that is going to increase your power every turn, 2 damaging spells per turn instead of just one, and Dark Eyes to generate the mana because it synergizes very well with Climb the Peak. This is what I mean by spell tweaking. At some point, you want to make some changes in your spells as well. And finally, the refining and polishing of all your pieces of equipment. And this late game is really, really long. I will say that my shaman just started late game a couple weeks ago when I was able to survive consistently with 98% chance the level 200 enemies in the events. And yeah, that was 2, maybe 3 weeks ago is when I started the late game. But as you can see, a lot of pieces of equipment are still far away from being maxed out. Some of them are pretty close, but still you need to spend a lot of resources to max them out. My armor, I need a much better one. Next time Coin Collector Adventure comes around, I will spend a lot of coins trying to upgrade it. But yeah, this one is not very good for the Ice Mastery, even when the armor is already maxed out, but still ways to go. As I said, the pants, the ring, and the amulet will probably be replaced. The boots are also decent, but still need a lot of work. The weapon is really, really bad because it rolled really low power, but the Dragon King axe is very, very slow to upgrade. The shield is what I'm working right now, try to increase a little bit more. The bone ring, good, but still needs a lot of work. And finally, the track belt is also good, but still needs some work. So this build will require at least another 6 months, and that's the best case scenario, in my opinion, to max out. Also, honing takes a lot of resources. As you can see, I have 3 pieces of equipment that are plus 400, which is fully honed, which are the Dragon King axe, the Bloodfang shield, and the Bloodfang gloves, because honing takes a lot of time and resources. But yeah, I will say that this is what I consider the late game for a specific build. So going back here, just for the end of the video, this is what I think you should work on in each stage of your build. And obviously different builds work in a different way. Some of them require more defenses than others. It's going to depend on a case-by-case scenario. But when you start, I think this is something that is very important. Work on your starting mana, work on your generator spells, and work on your damage. And don't worry about defense until you get to the mid game, and always be aware that builds are dynamic and you will need to make tweaks. And sometimes new pieces of equipment are, this is a live service game, so new pieces of equipment are available that maybe you will think, oh, maybe I can use this instead of that, and you need to be flexible. So that's the video. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and see you on the next one.